Do you have questions?
Francis, the question is regarding solipsism, and how do we know that our mind is not the only mind? There are good reasons that I have for why our mind is not the only mind, but what I'm asking is, it seems that if we were to rely directly on our experience, and our direct experience would tell us that there is only experience itself. But this experience there's no proof in this experience to show that this is purely subjective. The subjective label or objective label is purely a thought or an idea that we superimpose on this experience. And therefore, to call it solipsism, to say that this is just your individual subjective mind is itself a fallacy. I understand that, I guess. I'm not sure if that's a good reason. Well, I think it is a good reason. I believe it is. But maybe if you want to correct it, you can do so. But more than that, it still feels that the experience that there is, which I'm calling my own experience, might be the only experience there is. There might not be any other thoughts in other people, in other individuals. Again, I know I'm presupposing individuals, which I'm not supposed to do. But I still feel that that this partial view that I have might be the only view. Do you see where I'm going with
this?
Yes. Yeah.
Then why are you asking the question? You see what I mean? If it is the only view, whose view are you asking the question from? Because you're asking an external Francis.
Correct. Yes. It seems absurd. But
yes, I cannot. You are logically right. In the same way as someone who claims that consciousness is separate and limited cannot be proven wrong. You see, your point of view is not very different from the point of view of ignorance. In fact, it is a special kind of ignorant point of view. I mean, not your point of view, but the one you are playing the devil's advocate for in this moment, right? It's obviously an ignorant view because it is a view according to which this mind of yours is limited. And so it's a particular case of ignorance which does not only sees this mind as limited, but also it sees it as the only mind there is. Whereas usually in ignorance we see our mind, our consciousness as limited, but we don't see it as the only consciousness there is. We see a multiplicity of consciousnesses, right?
Right.
So it is a particular case of ignorance. So I cannot prove to you logically that the point of view of ignorance is wrong. But you cannot prove to me that it is right. You see?
Correct. Yes.
Because any form of proof that you would bring to the table would be phenomenal, right?
Correct.
Therefore, phenomenally, I cannot prove you wrong. You cannot prove me wrong.
Correct. Yes.
So the question that remains: how then can I make a determination? And that's where the experiential approach comes into play. In other words, in the experiential approach, we act, decide, think, feel, believe as if consciousness were universal and unlimited. So we grant other people not only minds but also consciousness. So for instance, when we interact with others, we interact on the basis that the consciousness out there, as I'm answering your question, that there is a consciousness out there which understands my answer, right? And otherwise I would just shut up, right?
Yes.
That's why I ask you, why are you asking this question? So, and the experimental approach is to see what are the effect, the consequences of this new attitude. You see, and that's all we can do. And they are happiness and serendipity. So that's my proposition, but it's for each of us to verify it or falsify it experientially.
Okay.
You see.
So, with regards to the manifestation of awareness, I might be rephrasing my question in a different way now, but
I like your question.
Thank you. Regarding the manifestations of awareness, the arisings that come and go, can we be certain that there are other bodies that have thoughts, at least, their own unique thoughts? Can we, or maybe it's just completely immaterial, or not an issue at all?
You mean, can we be certain that the physical world exists independently, has a form of existence independently from mind? That's a question? Because the physical world includes bodies, right? Bodies are not, if there are bodies, there are also tables, and cats and dogs and mountains, right?
Correct.
So I could rephrase your question: how can we be certain that there is a world out there and that it is not all mind stuff? Is that your question?
That there is a world out there.
Existing independently from minds.
Correct, yes.
That's your question,
That's
right?
my question, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the answer to that is similar. The world out there, existing independently from minds, is a model that enables us to, that gives us an explanation, a plausible explanation for the intersubjective agreement, right? Meaning that you and I, we agree that that's an orchid. The reason, the one explanation that you and I, we agree that that is an orchid, is that there is actually an orchid out there in the world, and that we are both looking at it, right? The other explanation is, Advaita, if there is only one consciousness, this consciousness simultaneously projects your mind and my mind, and because this consciousness is extraordinary intelligence, it also projects the images of this flower in your mind, in my mind, in a way which is consistent with a flower existing out there, whereas there is in fact no flower out there. You see, it's a little bit similar, if you will, to as the physicist. Where is he? What's the name we use for with Fourier transform, the projection of a three-dimension, which is in fact contained on a two-dimensional, the information is contained on a two-dimensional surface. Hologram. Yeah. So it's some kind of hologram, right? You see, in this case, the two-dimensional content of the information being the minds, and the mind then creates the illusion of a three-dimensional object. So, which one? So now the question becomes: how can we differentiate between these two models? And the answer is we can't. Right? It's a simple, straightforward answer. We can't. But the question assumes, you see, that one of these models would be true and the other would be wrong. Right. In other words, it makes the assumption that a model would be perfect and the other not perfect. Right. But in fact, we kind of know that all models are imperfect. You see, so we have to agree with that first, to understand that even in science, models are not perfect.
It's just a model.
And then that sometimes the truth is between two models. Like, is it a wave or is it a particle? Well, the answer is, it's kind of both. It's kind of linear combination of both, or something like that, in other words, but the mind wants certainty, and all the mind can do is project models. So we have to accept that models are uncertain. But the question that remains then is, does it matter? In other words, would there be any practical differences depending on whether the world exists out there independently from minds, or whether we are in the mind-only model, minds-only model, in which consciousness. Remember that consciousness is the ultimate reality of everything. So that even in the first model, the model in which a world exists out there, The reality of this world existing out there is still consciousness. That's very important. Consciousness projects the world out there in a different space than mind spaces, and then it projects mind spaces also, perhaps via human brains that belongs to this physical world, perhaps not. Who cares? The point is that for all practical purposes, it doesn't make any difference, because at the end of the day, it is all consciousness / reality. You see? So the moment it would matter in a model in which we try to, in which consciousness is not the ultimate reality of the world out there. Then it would matter. Because then we enter into the two mutually exclusive systems, the one which is philosophically the idealist model, and the other one is the realist model. You see? But because they are both usually dualistic, but in a non-dual perspective, the model, the realist model and the idealist model get reunited. That's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of the non-dual perspective. Is that the incompatibility, the mutual incompatibility of the two models that prevailed in a dualistic context disappears in a non-dualistic context, because consciousness equals reality. So then the reality of the physical world, reality, and the reality of a mind-only world, consciousness, merges. They merge.
So what about things like history? Is there objective truth to historical facts, or is it just?
Yeah, so it depends on what we call objective. So if objective means independent from mind, that's what usually, that if you use it in this context, if in the realist model, there are recordings, right? And there are traces from the past. So these recordings definitely exist independently from mind. In other words, there is psychological memory or subtle memory that manifests as thoughts, so subtle, and there are also physical memories, such as recordings, hard drives, motion pictures, right, that have a physical existence. So there are two types of memories in this case. But it doesn't make any, I don't see what difference it makes ultimately. Because in relation to time, the physical, what we call the physical world, could still be created in a timeless, eternal moment, coming with its past, affixed to it, attached to it, with each moment, you see? So then even in this case, the past wouldn't be cast in stone or in bronze. The past would be as open as the future.
Okay, so is it I'm sorry. Is it possible to conceive for you, I mean, according to the truth, that there are two conflicting, real reports of history? Two contradictory historical facts. Is it possible to conceive that both of them are true in this model?
Would these inconsistencies be between physical memories, or would they be between subtle memories?
Between certain memories?
No, between subtle psychological memories or between physical memories?
Between subtle memories.
You know, subtle memories are not...
Obviously, then, it's possible.
Yeah, but I mean, especially with Alzheimer's.
Especially with what?
With Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's.
Right, of course, yes. All right.
But then you see, regarding physical memories, I mean, I haven't had time to really think of it, but I don't see any inconsistencies, at least in physics. I don't know. I don't know whether that has been explored, but...
Okay. Even with physical memories, you would still conceive of that possibility?
Usually any seeming inconsistencies would be resolved by, upon closer examination. Because inconsistencies would require some kind of perhaps miracles. So miracles are exceptions. They are exceptions to the laws of physics, perhaps. But the laws of physics ensure consistency between physical events.
Correct. Yeah.
And we have always been able to find models that when new events were seemingly inconsistent with the laws, that we would eventually find laws. So yes, ultimately, for the time being, there are things that are inconsistent. Let's say dark energy. Because simply there is no physical explanation for that. So dark matter, perhaps also.
Thank you very much, Francis.
One of the processes we did this afternoon, body sensations represented branches, wires, or rooftops, and the bird represented the I thought?
No, it
represents
what we truly are.
Oh.
The I thought itself is one of the branches.
Oh. Okay.
Because it's a thought. The branches were made out of, let's say the branches were thoughts and the rooftops were bodily sensations, and what else was external sense perceptions.
Okay.
So the idea was to keep the real I airborne, not to allow for it to land anywhere. As long as it landed, to go there, and or simply being there, the bird will just take off.
So not
By looking at it. Because when you look at the bodily sensation, for instance, it's obviously not the consciousness. It is a content of consciousness, but it is not me. You see? It can impersonate me only in the twilight, only as long as I don't look at it. But when I look at it with clarity, it's obvious, it reveals itself for what it truly is, a bodily sensation. You see, so then, so there are bodily sensations that plays a part of me. You see, a toothache doesn't, but this sensation in the face or in the chest sometimes does. So by looking at them, so these sensations, they carry the feeling to be old acquaintances. You see, to be old friends, you know, like that. So we have been so used to believe that they were us that we just keep this tradition alive. So by looking at them, they reveal themselves for what they are, bodily sensations, or thoughts, or sense perceptions. But I don't think we really identify with sense perceptions, external sense perceptions, unless we are a little psychotic. But with thoughts, yes, with the I thought, yes, we do that. Or with our name, or with our personal memories.
Our reflection in the mirror.
Yes, and so with concept about what we are, with our football team or our nation, our ethnic origin, gender, etc., all that stuff, identity stuff, and so that's the thought-like part of the content of consciousness with which we identify. And there is a bodily sensation-like part with which we identify. And so in this process is called, in India, viveka, discrimination, between consciousness and the content of consciousness. That's what it is. Sometimes it is also called, this method, it's also called neti. Neti means not this, right? Which means, for instance, you have a bodily sensation you identify with. Okay, the bird has landed on this tree, right? A pine tree. And then you say, oh no, neti, I'm not this. Then the bird is free. Then you don't know what the bird is, right? The bird is not the tree. It flies. Then it's going to land somewhere else. And then you go in. I'm not that cypress either. And then the bird takes off. So neti. So then the bird comes back to the first tree, to the pine tree. Then you say, okay, I've already seen that. You see? You don't need to do the investigation again. It's just pine tree, okay. You have already taken notice of this tree, right? And there is a limited number of trees on which the bird can land. At some point, they have all been explored, at least the most likely ones. So then the bird doesn't land any longer. You see? And then you have nothing to do. What is important is to understand that the moment we have already investigated a previous tree, meaning a previous bodily sensation, and recognize that it was not us, The job has been done. That nothing further is required, especially not to change this bodily sensation, not to change it, or not to eliminate it. That is not required. It can stand the way it is. And it will evolve on its own, and it will at some point leave the field of consciousness, or it will stay there. It doesn't matter. What matters is for the bird to remain airborne. And as long as the bird is airborne, we are in meditation. Meditation that's it. It's when we are not identified. So we have to understand that the moment we were identifying with a bodily sensation in the face, and that at that moment we notice, no, that's a bodily sensation, it's not me. At that moment we enter meditation, because at that moment the bird takes off, And up until it lands again, we are in perfect meditation. And perfect meditation doesn't feel like the expectations most of us have of what it ought to feel like. That's the important point. Because most of us, having read books about people, in nirvana, smoking big, they have a very different expectation of what meditation feels like. But at some point, in this, when the bird stays airborne and gets used to remaining airborne, then the piece of the background gets more and more present. So there is something true to that, but perhaps not right away. That's why it's so important to recognize when we are in meditation and when we are not. Because we can be in a very pleasurable, ecstatic state and still believe to be this expanded body. In which case the body is in an expanded state, but we are not in meditation. And the body may be very uncomfortable, and we can be in meditation. So the opposite is true too.
Francis, I realize that each metaphor has its limitation, but how does it work when the bird realizes that all the objects, the branches and the wires and the ceilings and the rooftops are nothing but me itself?
Are what?
Are me. It is me, it's an extension of me, and they're not separate from me. I know this metaphor has some limitations, but how does that happen?
Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, the beings have their roots in me, but I don't have my roots in them. So what it means here in the case you are mentioning, that yes, all these objects are made of consciousness, but consciousness is not made of any of those. You see, so it is not really a two-way street between consciousness and the object. It is a hierarchy, whatever.
So this, when Krishna says that, what does it mean?
That's what he means, right?
Yeah. So does it mean that it is limited, no doubt, but it is limited with the form, with the shape that it takes?
Yeah. As consciousness, all the objects are consciousness, but consciousness is not the objects. The jewelry is made of gold, but gold is not made of jewelry. And there are other things that jewelry that are made of gold. And there is also gold which is not used to make objects, you see.
Actually, I had another question too. How can we be, we can be absolutely certain that, let me put it another way. How can we be absolutely certain that I am the creator of everything that I perceive? And so I was thinking about it, and would it be that when something arises in consciousness, if there is no separation, if I do not see any separation between that which perceives and that which is perceived, if I don't see the border or the separation, does that indicate that I am the creator of everything?
In pure consciousness, as pure consciousness, we are alone. In our freedom, in our independence, in our reality. Whatever arises then is simply made of this reality. And since before it arose, there was only us. We created. The experience of creation is directly related to the experience of the reality of pure consciousness. One thing is to explain it logically, as I just did, because then it feels almost like a corollary, right, of a fact that has to be experienced. But then to experience it, and that then to almost as a cooperation with the truth that has been revealed, to control or tame the old habit to believe that it is not my creation. First, you have to understand that there is no evidence that it is not my creation. And then, to live our life as if it were. You see, that's. But experientially, it is what I've said. The experience of pure consciousness reveals, it operates a 100-degree shift in the order of realities. The reality is instantaneously transferred from the world of objects to the consciousness. In the moment when consciousness experiences itself in its glorious solitude, in its glorious oneness. Because then it is first eternal, then non-affected by anything, and then real, because that's the only thing there is. And the reality of all things flows from the reality of consciousness. It bestows its reality to the world, and not the other way around as commonly believed. We are so certain on one that we have this deep intuition that consciousness is real, that we are not making it up, for instance, that even if I tell you there is no consciousness in this moment, you would say yes. Perhaps what is perceived is a dream, therefore an illusion, but nevertheless, there is at least one thing which is certain, that there is consciousness, and also that there is something rather than nothing. In other words, that there is consciousness and that there is being. And actually, this distinction between consciousness and being or reality is artificial, because this certainty, these two certainties originate from the same experience. Therefore, these two certainties have to be one, because they originate from the same experience in which there are no distinctions. How could they be two distinct two really distinct qualities out of one single experience in which there are no distinctions? So the distinction between being or reality and consciousness is made after the fact. It's a kind of a mind thing, depending on how we went to it. If we go to the absolute via physical objects, then we see it more as reality. If we go through it via the subjective sphere, we see it more as consciousness.
So on the subjective side, the way that I go inside is to see that the objects can only exist, or it is real as long as awareness or consciousness is there. If consciousness isn't there, the objects do not exist at all. And so it looks...
But consciousness, if consciousness isn't there, consciousness not being there, it's an impossibility.
Exactly.
That's very important. Reality not being... Why? Because there is reality. Because there is something rather than nothing. And as Krishna says, because I don't know, it's Krishna days today. After me bashing him yesterday, I have to restore his status. So Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, that which is not never comes into being, that which is never ceases to be. Never ceases to be, right? Therefore, because there is something rather than nothing, that. And that which is not never comes into being. Therefore, nothingness is an impossibility, has never existed, right? Because something which is not cannot come into being. Being cannot come into existence because it precedes any existence. The extraordinary connection is the one between consciousness and being, between Sat and Chit. That's the fundamental equation of non-duality is Atman equals Brahman, basically. That's.
And Sat being meaning that it's the changeless, not subjected to change, right?
What?
Not subjected to change, changeless.
Yes, that which is true, that which never changes, that which is real.
Because sometimes the way I distinguish between the real and the unreal is to look back at, if I observe the change, anything that changes, it could be a thought or a body sensation or an external sense perception, everything is changing. And the only way I can see those changes is from something that is changeless. Otherwise, I cannot observe the changes.
Yes. Of course, we know changes because of memory, right?
Sorry, what it is?
We know change, but it's very important also to notice that in the absence of object, no time elapses. That's why if we go into anesthesia, and if for some reason either there is nothing to memorize from this period, or because whatever was present at that moment, as it was experienced, was erased or was not memorizable. Because of this absence of memory, the moment when we were counting 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we don't remember, and the moment we wake up with a big pain, it seems that no time has elapsed. In fact, it lasted. You were for 5 hours being transformed. And it seems that you just went under. So in the absence of objects, time doesn't elapse. Time requires events, requires phenomena. This deep intuition we have that there is something that is timeless. That there is something that is. I cannot explain it, but I can speak of it for hours. I mean, I cannot prove it. But that's what all these guys have done, They have spoken about it, and then some guys listening have said, yes, but that's true. That's all. Once you have said, yes, that's true, it's too late, you have caught the virus.
Francis, I'd like to go back to the metaphor, to keep the bird airborne. It's in meditation then. And then I remembered your metaphor, even metaphor about even you can enjoy anger, enjoy big wave. You know, when the wave comes.
You are mixing the metaphors. It's not fair.
Really? I mean, when the energy comes, I like to release my energy or outrage or how. But even I do that, I land or not.
If you want to release it, you're already cooked because you are not surfing the wave. In order to surf the wave, surf. The wave. In order to surf the wave, you have to love the wave. You have to say, what a great wave. I mean, the wave may destroy you, but you have to love it. You need to say, what a beautiful wave. You see, it's a big wave of anger, you know. Yeah, so much energy there, you know. Let's surf it because it's a powerful wave, so you can. But if you try to get rid of the waves, then the wave will get rid of you.
No. Maybe release was not very good word. Yeah, I sometimes get some energy and without building some negative feeling, I can release it, bang the door, throw some, I don't know. I mean, when I was race car drive, I just if car in front of me too slow, I just bump it, let it go. Hey, let it go. I mean, I was having fun. I mean, you know, I developed that urge. I feel it on public road, but I don't do it. I don't frustrate. Urge come, but I mean, I'm enjoying the wave, the sense. So.
When you are in the middle of it, you have no distance. It's just, when I was using this metaphor of surfing the wave, it's when you have already taken some distance, when you realize, wow, I am so angry, I am so upset, you see? And then you want to do something about it. Because often that's a question which is asked. You know, what do I do when I am angry at my kids, at my teenager daughter, you know, or at my mother-in-law or whatever. And the moment I want to do something about it, it means I have already realized that I am in a situation that I kind of don't like. You see, and I want to do something about it. So then, that's when you have to love the wave and use it as a tool. There is already a build-up of energy, you see, and by allowing for this energy to flow, you will understand better the etiology of it, meaning how you went into it. You will go back to the source. You will, and eventually, you will catch yourself with the same distance earlier on. In other words, you will catch earlier symptoms of the wave, and then you won't have to go through it. But if you enjoy, you know, driving fast, I can understand that some guy in the middle, especially in America where you have 3 cars, there are 3 lanes, and there are 3 guys on purpose driving at the same speed and blocking the road. It's very American. In Europe, it's illegal. It's against the law to do that. And it's such a misuse of the freeways. Because you could have twice or three times the same traffic if people were required to drive as far to the right as possible. So then I understand the guy comes in and especially this guy who is a professional racer, so he can go bumper to bumper. So I guess finally the guy in front gives up.
So, from the yoga, it seems like the initial phase is to witness or to look at all the objects that appear, the sense perceptions, the body sensations, and then say, okay, I'm not identified with it. And then the next phase is to look at all the objects that appear and say, I am identified with everything. Is that what it is? Because then I am?
It's not to say it. But
yeah.
What I was suggesting is a tool. What is going to happen in this process is that the boundaries of the body will dissolve. And then the experience, without thinking of it, prior to conceptualizing it, will be already one without borders. That's all. In other words, it will realign itself with the truth of consciousness. In meditation, that's what happens. So it will, because then once these bodily sensations with which we were identifying, we are not identifying with them any longer, they cease to occupy a privileged position as a result. As a result, they become a perception in consciousness like any other. In other words, the privileged position that they seem to occupy closer to me than, let's say, a tree in the landscape or a sound, then doesn't exist any longer. This dimension of depth, as I was saying a few days ago, disappears so that everything becomes two-dimensional, if you will, without depth. So everything is at the same distance.
Got it. Makes sense. Now, there are some body sensations that, like you said, are closer. At least I've not been successful in just looking at it and then, not dispensing with it, but seeing it for what it is. And then you say, oh, when it comes up again, you already know that it is just a body sensation. That identification, there's definitely a difference in depth. These body sensations, like you were saying, the chest or the face, is definitely closer.
Well, it depends close to what. Because obviously they are close to the body. But they are not closer to you as consciousness. And remember that we start from consciousness. We don't start from the body. We didn't start from the body. It was about me as consciousness. Right? So if it's no bodily sensation is more me as consciousness than any other sense perception.
Actually, I meant that identification. It just seems there's more meaning to it. Like you were saying, difference from a tree, that seems to have more meaning or more value or something that.
see it completely, without talking about meaning, and just see it completely, asking, what are you? You know, like you are just interested, curious about it.
Yeah, it seems to be easier to look at a sensation like, my arm on the armrest. That sensation is easy to see for what it is.
Yeah.
But these ones that, like the sensation in the chest.
Well, they are the ones that are interesting, because we want to change it, we want to transform them, and that's the obstacle. But the fact that it's in the chest, for instance, try to be even more precise. Try to see, what is that? Is that the heart? Is that the lungs? Is that the diaphragm? Is that the esophagus? Is that the pleura? Is that the mediastinum? Whatever.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. There's another comment that you made, which actually, that I've been grappling with. You said, the sense perceptions you usually don't identify with. But the sense, the vision of, like right now, I see the body here, and that seems to make me feel localized.
Okay, the body is localized.
But then it seems like I am localized to the body. That seems to be one of the most insidious sense perceptions.
Actually, when I look at my leg, I see this computer. It's totally arbitrary that say that's me and that's not me. Why would I say that?
I think it's just, again, conditioning.
It's usually the people would say, because I can control the movement of my arm and I cannot control the movement of the table, which is completely wrong, because look.
Thank you.
Can you explain again why the brain cannot be the source of consciousness? Can the brain be like self-knowing the way we say consciousness is?
Why would the brain know? What is the evidence that the brain knows?
So if you measure the electrical activity, like if you're giving anesthetics, you can see where at a certain point you can predict that you lose awareness, at least that individual loses awareness. And then
what is the awareness? Okay. The problem is in the definition of awareness or consciousness. And the medical definition, okay, you have someone coming to the emergency, right? And it seems in bad shape. And the nurse asks, "What's your name?" No answer, right? And "Can you see my finger when I move?" no answer.
Yeah.
So, patient is non-responsive, unconscious, no awareness, right? So that's a definition of consciousness, which is, number one, attributed to an object, a physical body, right, a human body, and attributed to this object according to a series of benchmarks, right?
But do we have proof that awareness exists when the person is unconscious? Awareness, how we define it?
What?
I'm just wondering, I know there's like two different definitions. What's the proof that awareness as we are defining it exists when the person is medically unconscious?
Or, for instance, during the sleep at night, people would say, I call this person, not too loud, but hi there. No response, right? So we say, he's not conscious of my thing, but the guy is dreaming that he is in Hawaii on the beach at the same time.
But that could just be like an altered state of mind, right? Like delirium or...
What I'm saying is that there are two experiences. One is the experience of the doctor in the room, and the other experience is the experience of the patient, right? And the determination of medical consciousness is made by the doctor, and the determination of the reality that perceives is made by the patient. Right?
Yeah.
And they are made from two different vantage points, two different perspectives, and using very different criteria. The doctor or the neuroscientist is going to use objective criteria. In any case, it may be asking questions from the patient, or trying to move the patient, or looking at the EEG, or whatever, or an MRI of the brain, right? Things like that. And it may turn out that the guy was having a near-death experience, and then at the same time, he was in this light, so happy, and seeing all his dead relatives, right? So, what is important when we talk is not to talk apple and oranges. So the only point I'm making is that my definition of consciousness and the definition that scientists give to it are different. So we should use different words.
But like, what proof do we have that awareness exists without a body? Like awareness, how we define it. Don't you have to be like conscious or semi-conscious?
Wait a minute. The question is, what evidence do we have that awareness, as who defines it? As doctors define it, or as the patient defines it?
Like even as we define it, without a body, like how can we experience awareness?
You say, what evidence do we have that it exists without the body?
Yeah, like...
Well, the body is an experience.
Yeah.
This experience is not always present. In the absence of the experience of the body, there is still awareness. I'm talking about subjectively.
Yeah.
For instance, between two perceptions, between two thoughts, where is your body?
Like we are not conscious of it, but it's there, right?
It is there for the nurse in the room,
Yeah.
not for you. You see, it's always, we have always to be careful when we talk about awareness, not to talk apples and oranges. Because there is a big misunderstanding in the scientific community. They think they have a good definition of it. They don't. They have their definition, which should have a different name, like sentience, or let's call it consciousness, fine, but then I would call awareness something else.
But even the fact, like what proof like we say that consciousness never dies, right? Like the way we define it.
What proof do we have that it does?
We don't have proof that it doesn't die.
So why insist?
Like the
why being biased one way or the other?
Yeah, you can't prove it either way. But you know how people say like it's eternal? What's my experiential basis for saying that it's eternal?
What? You are asking for something which is impossible, because you are asking, implicitly perhaps, for phenomenal evidence that consciousness, which is not a phenomenon, has eternal existence. As I define consciousness, it is not a phenomenon, and that's a problem that neuroscientists, biologists, and psychologists have, is that they see consciousness as a phenomenon. So what I'm talking about is the subjective experience of consciousness, which is not a phenomenon. That's why I call it the reality of our experience, the reality of our human experience.
How do you know that I'm not arguing, I'm just trying to clarify.
We are arguing, but we are nicely arguing.
Politely. How do you personally know that consciousness is eternal? Is it based on what your teacher told you, or do you just have this deep knowing?
I have the same knowings that you can have. Ask yourself, how do I know I am conscious? Do you know that you are conscious because you have learned that in medical school? Because your parents have told you that?
No, it's an experience.
Yeah. Now, the common assumption about how we know that there is consciousness is that it is an inference that we derived from the presence of perceptions. That is not possible. We have to understand that such an inference is a fallacy. We have to understand that it is not possible to infer consciousness from the experience of perceptions. Because that's not how the inference process works. If you want, we can go down that road. The inference process requires, in order to infer A from B, requires multiple prior experiences of simultaneity between A and B. So then, the moment B is experienced, we infer that A must be present, like fire and smoke. If there is smoke, we infer the presence of fire. Why? Because in the past, we have had multiple experiences of simultaneously experiencing smoke and fire. And that always, when there was smoke, there was fire. So then we say, once more, If there is smoke, there must be fire. It's only a question to find it. But here, the contention is that consciousness is never experienced, cannot be experienced directly. That's very important to understand that. The argument is, we know that there is consciousness only, or awareness, only because there are perceptions of objects, perceptions. And that, but if there were not perceptions of objects, we could not know that there is consciousness. So the claim is that direct experience of consciousness is impossible. And that consciousness is inferred from the presence of perceptions. But this argument is self-defeating for the simple reason that the inference process requires multiple previous experiences, occurrences, of both the inferring object and the inferred object. In the case in point, the inferred object is consciousness. And the claim is made that consciousness has never been experienced. Therefore, inference cannot work. Therefore, every time we make the argument that we know consciousness because we infer it from the presence of perception, we are self-deluding. We are making a big mistake in our reasoning. You see, it seems so natural, it seems so logical. Oh, I know there is consciousness because I perceive object. Well, I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. You don't. It's an easy but mistaken explanation. It's not possible. Therefore, since we know that there is consciousness, not from hearsay, from our parents and so on, not from inference, but nevertheless that we seem to know it with a certainty, we can only know it from some kind of experience that delivers absolute certainty, unlike any kind of phenomenal experience we know, because any phenomenal experience has always a margin of doubt attached to it, because everything we experience, it could be deluding, self-deluding, or you could be making a mistake somehow. But with consciousness, there is this, so it's a different type of experience. So then, then as a result, the only possibility that we are left with is that we derive our certainty that there is consciousness from direct experience of it, and from a channel through which we experience it, which is a channel of absolute certainty. It is also a channel which is instantaneous, because it doesn't take long to know that we are conscious. You see? So it's a non-phenomenal channel, in a sense, through which we know that we are conscious.
But it's still experienced with the human body, right?
What?
It's still experienced with the human body. No?
Through a human body? No, that's the opposite. The human body is experienced through consciousness. When we say that consciousness is experienced through a human body, it flies in the face of our actual experience. It's not scientific. The very fact is that we know that we have a human body because we have consciousness. And we don't know that we have consciousness because we have a human body.
Okay.
Because if we had a human body without consciousness, we couldn't know that.
I'll have to chew on that.
It's very simple, and the truth is simple. But it has been obfuscated by some kind of very simplistic view of what we are, that we have inherited from the cavemen. It's so simple. We know that we have a body because we are conscious. It's not the other way around. There is a strange misinterpretation of our experience there.
But then, like when we are in deep sleep, we don't have awareness of, at least we don't have a memory that we were aware during deep sleep.
Yes, but the fact that we don't remember, first, the fact that we don't remember doesn't mean there were no perceptions.
True.
Okay, that's the first thing. In fact, the fact that there is brain activity during deep sleep suggests that there is some form of perception. Because that's the argument that neuroscientists made. They say if there is mind activity, there is perception, right? And I agree with that. I agree that because that is scientifically proven that by debriefing patients, patients, subjects, by debriefing subjects, although it is not direct evidence, but there is a correlation that can be established between electrical signals and the presence of perceptions, right? And also areas in the brain. That is not in question. Neuroscience has its domain, and it's very valid. I'm not a New Age guy, anti-science. I'm not into conspiracy theories. No. And but awareness is a different matter. Such as the gap between perceptions. The gap between thoughts. What happens in the moment of understanding? You see, we cannot understand something halfway. Either we get it or we don't, right? It's like you cannot be half pregnant. Yeah. Or I don't know. You cannot half shoot a gun, right? Either you pull the trigger and the bullet leaves the barrel, or you don't. But there is not something in between. So it's the same here. Either you understand the joke or you don't, which means that there is a moment of almost of no duration in which his understanding takes place. Because before that moment, you didn't get it. After, you can laugh. So in between this transition, you were at the moment of understanding, you are present because it's you who understands. But the prior thought is no longer present, and the laughter is not yet present. So it's a moment on the razor's edge when you cannot be half pregnant or half understand it. Are you following me?
Yeah.
There is a clear gap there, a clear discontinuity. And in this discontinuity of perception, that which is perceived is discontinuous. You are very much present. You are, because it is you who understand. It's not somebody else. So you are very much present as awareness in the gap between two perceptions. You see? And even it is a heightened awareness, if you will, in this moment, right? The moment of understanding is very powerful, very. So you are at the. It's very different when we look at the subjective realm, which is totally unexplored, especially in the Western culture, versus the phenomenal realm, which is the scope of science. You know, it's very different. Both have their validity. But in terms of happiness, only one has validity. You are not going to find happiness in the realm of phenomena.
Thank you.
So going back to the yoga and the image of the bird being airborne. So like being airborne is one thing, but you said to remain airborne, and that seems quite radical. And like during the yoga, what happened was I was noticing the sensations, you know, like some residual sensation in the chest. And then you said, especially after you said like something like a question may arise, you know, what happens if the sensation persists? And then you're saying, then there's nothing to do. The answer is don't do anything. So then I realized, because I realized I had already identified it and I was still looking at it, you know, so then I just said, oh yeah, I don't have to do anything. And then I just ignored it, and then it, you know, it was free to, anyway, so then I was thinking, oh, I feel pretty transparent. But then I realized that the whole time that I had been looking with this feeling as if I was looking from here, you know, like that there was this feeling of being in the head, you know, from which I was looking at these sensations.
That's another sensation.
Right. But then I realized like that's often that's my main home branch, you know, where I've kind of built a home that even if I'm airborne for some moments, I always land back there, you know, it's the
Yeah, but the fact that this sensation is present is not a problem the moment it has been debunked.
Yeah, so then when I saw it, you know, of course I was not located there. I mean, it was clear I was not located there. But there's, I can see that some of it is a habit, you know, this compulsion to kind of go back to the same familiar, like you were saying, it's a very cozy, or I forget what word, like a familiar place to land. But I think there's also somewhere this belief that, because the idea of not having anywhere to land, I noticed was kind of a scary prospect when you mentioned it. And I feel like there's this belief.
You have to understand what I meant by land. Landing doesn't mean that there is no sensation. It means that I'm not sitting on landing means that I am sitting on a sensation which has not been already put in one of the three baskets. That's all it means. If there is a sensation that has already been put in one of the baskets, and if I don't try to do anything about it, I'm still airborne.
You say if I haven't identified it as one of the first three?
If there is if there is a sensation which is present, which I've already recognized for what it is, and as a result, I'm not trying to do anything about it. I'm still airborne in this metaphor. I have not landed, because the problem is not what I call to land is when we are sitting with a sensation which is still active as a me impersonator, which has not been recognized yet for what it is. Or, although I have recognized it for what it is, I am trying to do something about it because I believe that it is some kind of problem.
So, like, I feel like there is this belief somehow that if I'm not somehow have this feeling of being centered in the body, especially the head, that I won't be able to function, like in everyday life. Like there's a fear of letting go of this center of, my home where
That's different. Because you can very well have this sensation in the head and be perfectly happy.
Yeah, so is that...
And not be limited to it by it, not be identified with it. It can be present and you don't care about it. It just is one sensation among others.
So is it just a myth or like a mistaken belief that in order to function in the world, I need somehow, I don't know, that the functioning comes somehow from...
Oh yes, that's a mistake, yes. Yeah. That's you don't need. You have to let go of this fake support, because this support is not going to hold you and you're going to fall, so don't trust it. It's a fake.
Like it's fake as in it's never been the case that...
It's never been the case.
Okay. I mean, I think that's where the fear comes in, is that
it doesn't do you any good, it's like the teeth or the braids, I just went bankrupt and my wife is cheating with my best friend. Oh, come, let's have a cup of tea.
So I feel like I'm beating a dead horse, but so it's just an illusion that I don't know why that feeling is very persistent.
Let go of it. Let go of the branches. Yeah. You're a big girl now.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. I did like a Buddha experiment where I couldn't do it completely fully, but of course I did. Where I meditated for at least 24 hours and I didn't eat and I didn't drink water or anything. And there was glimpses where you go past the identification of the starvation and the non-sleep. And there's moments where you are identified with the starvation and not sleeping. And I guess some guidance on the journey. would be appreciated.
The guidance is don't do that.
Why not? Yeah, I stopped after the first day. Yeah, that's literally it. I think that's literally it. Now, there's something beautiful that Laura was saying about like the Buddha, and it was almost his journey of letting go of desire. And then I remember reading in like the Bhagavad Gita where it was talking about how lust is like the biggest thing ever, you know? And I think I've become like this like crazy maniac that's trying to like completely let it all go in a sense. I'm still accepting if it comes, like it's not necessarily like a big deal if it comes or goes or anything. It's just like, oh, okay, it's there. But that experience of just like pure consciousness where you say like there's that desirelessness and stuff, like there's glimpses of that, and just the ability to sustain the beauty of that, but not necessarily being attached to that glimpse or anything like that. Yeah.
You know, that which perceives the thoughts is free from the thoughts.
Mm. Mm.
So that which perceives the thought of desire is in fact free from the thought of desire.
Indeed.
The thoughts they come and they go, they are like images in the mirror, you know, and the mirror is not affected by the reflections.
So, just to make a joke, so that which is perceiving starvation is not starving.
Only a body is starving.
Indeed.
And that's why that which is the experience of that which perceives the body cannot be reached by manipulating the body. You see? And that's why I said don't do that. And in the same way, the experience of that which perceives the mind cannot be reached by manipulating the mind.
Yes.
It's only when when the mind kind of gives up,
Yes.
that which is beyond the mind shines, you see. Otherwise, the mind activity obfuscates it.
Yes. So you're saying it's almost like a natural happening by itself.
Yes, we are naturally what we are.
Yes.
You are perfectly equipped for happiness, like all of us, and nothing happens by chance.
Yeah, there was a little bit of manipulation. Yeah, thank you.